Welcome everyone. We have people here today from California, Florida, Montreal, New York, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and many other places around the world. We have participants joining us today here via Zoom, and we have some participants joining us tonight via Facebook Live. And may we have a wonderful conversation. And I would like to give up the stage for Rabbi Barry Silver.
Thank you very much, David. It's indeed a pleasure to be here to try to bring about a civil discourse. And this is something that is so important today. The Jewish community is divided, America is divided, the world is divided. And I thank David Bedein for doing this wonderful mitzvah of bringing people together from different perspectives to try to deal with the facts and to try to preserve Jewish unity. He's got a wonderful background. He comes from Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. He is a social worker. I hope that the president won't hold it against him and call him one of those darn socialists because he's a social worker. But he's a social worker turned journalist, and now he's doing great work, providing information for people. But I want to thank him and congratulate him because he's a wandering Jew. He wandered from conservative over to Orthodox. He takes a right-wing position religiously, and I'm on the left in most ways. But he contacted me and reached out to me and said, let's dialogue. And we had a great discussion. We did not agree on everything. We only agreed on certain things, but it didn't matter. And that's the whole point of today. And that's why I want to thank David for doing such a wonderful mitzvah of bringing people together. We're going to turn it over to experts. Before we do, I just want to share something with everybody. First of all, we have people from all over the world. So I will say, bienvenidos a todo el mundo. Es un placer de estar aquí con todos ustedes de todos los países. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec tout le monde de tous les pays. Bienvenue à tout le monde. And I also want to say this from the different languages. Juntos unidos, jamás vencidos. Always together, will never be defeated, and Hamas will also be defeated. Toujours unis, nous sommes bénis. If we're always together, we are blessed. Together united, will never be divided. And in Hebrew, kulanu yachad, en lanu pachad. When we are together, we are strong, and we have no fear. Am Yisrael Chai. I thank you, David, for setting this up. I look forward to listening to our experts. And then I would also like to offer something towards the end of a spiritual nature. But thank you so much. Let the dialogue begin.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Silver. What I want to do is, what inspired me was people in my own family who are very involved in following politics in the United States. I have 500 relatives there. And some of the family said, when I presented the fact that Biden, the presidential candidate, was in favor of returning the U.S. funds to UNRWA and recognition to the PLO, which he made in several speeches in the month of May, my family members didn't know about that. Neither did my friends. So I said, this says to me, this is just a symptom of issues that people don't know. So the concept of let my people know is what motivates this issue, this discussion this evening. So I would like to ask three people from different perspectives, but they all are masters of knowledge, and that's what's important. We have Moti Kedar, who teaches at Bar Ilan, Tel Aviv University, Ariel University, who spent 25 years doing research in Israeli intelligence. He's going to make some comments. Arlene Kushner, who has been has her own blog, which you can see, Arlene from Israel. She researched two books, the most definitive book on the Palestinian Authority, which just about every diplomat in Israel uses, very important. And she also was the person who blew the whistle on the UNRWA-Hamas connection through various research pieces that she did over 10 years ago, and they're being used today. And then we have Mark Schulman, who is a history buff, who is a regular columnist in a number of places which are very prominent and very credible, including Newsweek. And he has developed his own website called historycentral.com. I'm looking forward to to swimming in that website and not getting away from it. But I have to say, well, I'm not a technical person, I have to apologize that we had to close this discussion to only 500 people. We will have this on our website, which is israelbehindthenews.com. In 24 hours, it'll be there, so people who missed it will be able to see it. So let me turn the floor over right now to Moti Kedar. Moti, what do you understand and Moti, by the way, though he's a native Israeli, married to an American, the granddaughter of my grandfather's rabbi, but he regularly visits the U.S. and gives talks. Moti, how do you see the candidates' positions on Israel?
Well, when it comes to the refugee problem, we have to explain something which Westerners usually don't understand about what happens here in the Middle East. Imagine a group of people, men, women, old people, children, babies, live in the 40s, already in the 50s, like 70 years ago, in places like Lebanon, where the winter is very cold, even snow falls there. They live out there in tents, which fly with the wind, exposed to rain on one side, on part of the year, and very, very hot sun on the other part of the year. And the diseases, food, they almost have nothing. Water, what they have, they would sewage, maybe to drink. And this is how refugees in the Middle East lived, including those who ran away from this country, in the late 40s, after 1948, into the 50s, and even into the 60s. Even when they built some huts, they looked like a wreck from the beginning. And, buildings which didn't even stop the rain from coming into the building. And the question which raises by itself is, hey guys, nobody saw them? Those, the inhabitants of Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, people knew exactly how these thousands, many thousands, dozens of thousands in every camp, how could they live in such a place without raising the sympathy of the neighbors? How could those host countries, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and in Gaza as well, under the Egyptian occupation, how did they allow such a situation where so many people, men, women, old people, babies, are living in such conditions for a year and another year and another year and another year? Mind-boggling. How could they allow such situation? How can one understand that so many people live in such a place, in such conditions, and the authorities and the neighbors, nobody cares. Nobody really does anything about this. And this is actually something which Westerners do not understand, because in Europe, 5 years after the Second World War, there was no refugees anymore. Either they were repatriated wherever they went, or settled wherever they're alive, or went back to the places. No, Western thinking doesn't accept refugeehood. You have to stop the problem. But in the Middle East, we are having here a cultural problem. And the cultural problem says that if you are not from my place, and if you think that you are not from my place, the hell with you. Even if you are this Arab or a Muslim, just like myself or whatever, nobody cares about you. Why? Because you're not from my tribe, you're not from my village, you're not from my town. You can go to hell for many years in this refugee camp. I don't care. I would say people are numb from seeing the agony of others. They don't move. And actually, what you see as a result of this numbness, that Syria, during the Arab Spring, had like 1 million casualties. 1 million people got killed and injured. Who knows how many millions got injured? Who cares? Have you ever heard about one demonstration in Cairo or in Baghdad because of the agonies of the people in Syria? Did you ever hear any demonstration in Cairo for the agonies of people in Libya or Yemen? In the Arab world, people are numb. They don't care about human suffering. This is a problem because this problem comes from the fact that these people live in the desert. And in the desert, you have to take care of yourself because there is no water to share with anyone else. And the people who live in this Middle East for ages, for who knows how many millennia, way before Islam came to the world, they live here for who knows how, maybe 500, 600, 700,000 years since the human beings started to live in the desert of the Middle East. And in the Middle East, in the desert, you are at your own. If you don't care about yourself, you are a dead man. You cannot divide.
Moti, Bavakasha, please relate this to the presidential campaign and to the position of the current president and the man who wants to be president.
No, wait a minute. What I mean is that the fact that the Palestinian refugees remained refugees until this very day is a problem which comes from the Arab culture. And I'm not sure that Americans and Europeans should support such a culture. They
Moti,
should tell
connect
them
this to the presidential campaign, please.
this presidential campaign should tell these people, the refugees, you means the people who are responsible for your agony is your Arab friends. You don't need our money.
You need to explain the connection to what President Trump did on this issue and what the
President Trump
it suggests to do on this issue, please.
President Trump did exactly what should be done. He said no Western money to preserve the deviations of your culture. You solve your problem by yourself. You means Arabs. You were the responsible for the war because you invaded Israel one day after it was established. So since you are responsible for the problem of the refugees, you solve it with your money, not with American taxpayer money. Why should we keep pouring money because you cannot solve the problem of refugees because of your culture, because of your desert culture, and because you are numb in order not to see people suffering? And this is what any candidate, whether Trump or Biden, should tell these people, and not trying to make face as if we need the Western money. You know, Arab countries who are the real reason for the 1948 war, because they invaded Israel, they should have solved this problem either by resettling these people in the places which they came from originally. You know, the Palestinians who came from Syria originally ran away to Syria, to their homes which they were before they came to Palestine. Those who ran to Lebanon went to Lebanon because they wanted to go back to the places which they lived before they came to Palestine to work in the Jewish settlements.
What are the implications from your point of view of the fact that Biden gave 3 speeches in May saying that America has to reinstate the funds that it took away from UNRWA?
It means that Biden tries to perpetuate the refugee problem rather than solving it. Because if you take the money out of this problem, the problem will be solved. If you give more money, the problem will perpetuate itself forever.
Thank you. I'd like to go over to Arlene Kushner, who has researched this issue, and get her perspective and also her perspective on the campaign. Arlene.
Wait a minute, Arlene.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Okay. I want to talk first very briefly about how thrilled we are here in Israel. Most Israeli Americans are pro-Trump. And there's a reason, because we're closer to the issues and we understand that Trump gets it. And he's done things that have been marvelously exciting for us, things we never saw before. And it's not just the moving of the embassy. It's a recognition that it's not illegal, according to international law, to have settlements, Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. It's a recognition that we have rights to apply sovereignty to at least part of it. It's a recognition that Iran is dangerous and there has to be a stand against Iran. That's tough, which is why he pulled out of the Iran agreement. The things that Trump has done have pleased us very much, and we feel make for a safer world and a safer Israel. And what we're looking at now, and it terrifies us, is the possibility of a reversal of that with a Biden administration. And I want to make 3 points because I know my time is limited. I don't think anybody would disagree with me when I say that Biden will be a very weak president. It's speculated, not unreasonably, that he might not even make it through his 4 years because of his cognitive and other weaknesses. But the fact is that there will be great influence on him by others. He's not a man who's strong and will only think for himself. And we have to talk about what those influences would be on him and look at all those influences if we're going to know what we get from a Biden administration. And I want to quote first from Jonathan Tobin, who wrote back when Biden was first nominated, "Obama is back. The Democrats are comfortable with the idea that the only way to beat Trump is with an Obama nostalgia tour. Go back to what Obama did." And Biden campaigns on this and brags about the fact that he was Obama's loyal vice president and supported him and so forth. And I just want to mention in this context a couple of things. Obama is for rapprochement with Iran that would give the regime, and this is an Obama quote, "a chance to get right with the world." That's terrifying because the mullahs don't want to get right with the world. And if you give them the latitude to do this, this is dangerous to Israel. This is dangerous to the democracies in the area. But this would be Obama's position, and we can assume it would also be Biden's position. And he also wrote that Biden is an enthusiastic supporter of Obama's efforts to pressure Israel into concessions. And this is something we saw consistently through the Obama regime. And what's being suggested here is we're going to go back to that kind of pressure again. That's one point. Another point is Kamala Harris, who would be Biden's vice president, and a very, very strong one. She once alluded to the Harris-Biden administration, and everybody recognizes she would have much more influence than is normally true with a vice president. And she is against sovereignty, for application of sovereignty for Israel. She's for a two-state solution, which means going back to the totally untenable 1949 armistice line, that everything beyond that belongs to the Palestinians. And just to demonstrate how leftist she is, and she's moved more leftist over time, consistent with the party's movement leftist. There was a time when she would go each year and speak to AIPAC. 2 years ago, she agreed to speak to AIPAC only if it was not publicized. And last year, she refused to speak to AIPAC. She only went to talk to J Street. And this tells us a whole lot where she's coming from. And this is someone who would have enormous influence on Biden. Lastly, I want to mention the squad. This is the four real left-wing progressives in the Democratic Party. They, with some other progressives in Congress, have formed a group called the Working Families Party. It's a very progressive group. And I want to quote from what the director of that group said. "We've always said that electing Joe Biden was a doorway and not a destination. They're not electing him for what he stands for, but because they see him as weak enough and they talk about it, it's in print, they want to pressure him to go more left on a lot of things progressively, and that would mean on Israel as well in terms of support for the PLO and all of the other things that are progressive." And they mentioned specifically that they see Kamala Harris as aligned to Biden. She's to the left of Biden, and they see her as the way into Biden to influence Biden. And they have already a plan on how they're going to influence this. So it's impossible to judge what Biden is without looking at these influences And from where we sit, these influences are malign because they can only be destructive to Israel, giving Iran more authenticity in the international community, lifting sanctions and all the rest, renegotiating with them, giving the PLO more respect and saying that they have a right to the land and Israel has no right to apply sovereignty and the settlements are illegal, undoing all the things that Trump did. From the perspective, not only my perspective, but most American Israelis, this would be a horror and would be highly destructive to Israel.
Thank you, Arlene. I'd like to go over to Mark Schulman for your perspective on where the candidates stand on issues on Israel and Israel-related issues. Thank you, Mark, please.
Okay. First, I have to state that the state that most American Israelis is just not true. Yes, probably 50% of American Israelis agree with a lot of what was just said. But about 50% of us, primarily those live in Tel Aviv.
Yoni, see if you can
Yeah. Mark, we're having some connectivity issues. Maybe if you can improve your connection and we can be back with you in a minute.
Wait, unmute. You are muted now. 1 second. Hold on a second.
Perhaps Mark, perhaps Mark, if you turn off your video, we can still hear you. Let us try now.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, now it's great.
Much better. Much
Hello?
better. Mark, you sound
That's
fine.
strange. Okay, I have 500 megabyte. Okay, so let me start over again then. First of all, as an American Israeli, I don't think Arlene speaks for all American Israelis, even most American Israelis, but 50% of them. 50% of us do not share her views, do not share her views about the West Bank, do not share views about many issues. Some of us are much more progressive, and some of us have opposed settlements from that perspective, for all that matters. But that's not the point. The point of the matter is that Joe Biden represents traditional democratic values, a vice president who supported Israel throughout his career, 42 years of working with Israel. He was the one more than anyone else who was behind the $38 billion arms agreement, guarantee that the United States will continue providing money for arms for Israel for 10 years. He's the person who most negotiated and pushed it. He has been one of the strongest supporters of Israel in Congress in all of his years that he's been there. And to use the Republican talking points because he's weak and all of those matters, he was strong enough to win the nomination, and he looks like he's strong enough to beat President Trump in the election if things stay the way they look at the moment. So talking about him being weak is not really realistic, or is not really being honest. Second of all, and I'll get to the most important points in a moment, this use of the squad always. The squad represents the far left of the Democratic Party. There's always been a far left of the Democratic Party. I mean, we can think of when Jackson ran to be president and to be the head of the Democratic Party back in I guess it was the late 80s. We were all concerned that look what's happening to the Democratic Party. Well, he didn't win then, and the far left did not win this time in the Democratic primaries. The squad will have some little push. But remember why the Democrats gained control of Congress last year. They gained control of Congress because middle of the road, mostly veterans and others, won their electoral districts against Republicans. They're the center point of the Democratic Party in Congress today, not the squad who represents 100% Democratic districts, and they can be extreme because that's what happens in politics. Now let's go to the Iran Accords for a moment. Yes, Biden wants to rejoin the Accords because Trump's policy has failed. The problem with Trump, almost across the board, is there's never a plan B. And the same thing happened here. He pulled out of the Iran Accords without a plan B. And the fact of the matter is he's isolated the United States on the world stage. Look what just happened when he tried to use a snapback. If he'd been part of the agreement still, he could have used snapback. Because snapback was bringing back all the sanctions by claiming that Iran is not living up to the agreement. And based on the agreement, if you're part of the agreement, you can call for a snapback. But he had pulled out of the agreement, so when he called for a snapback of all the sanctions, all the rest of the countries in the world said, well, you're not part of the agreement, and since we don't follow you anymore because the United States has lost its standing in the world, it's become weakened in the world because most countries in the world no longer follow the United States. because Trump has pulled out of every single agreement that he could. He's no longer leading the free world or any part of the world. And from my perspective, and as Israeli, the United States is the single most important ally and the single most important, quote unquote, weapon that Israel has, our alliance with the United States. And anything that weakens the United States weakens Israel. And Trump has single-handedly weakened the United States over the last 4 years. And that's what scares me, is the fact that a weakened United States, a United States that's pulling out of Afghanistan, a United States that left the Kurds to their own devices, they can make any sort of decisions because there's no staff work involved. There's no deep understanding of issues. There's no reading of intelligence reports. There's a decision made because President Trump feels like he wants to do whatever it is. That is a country that we cannot rely on. So yes, his rhetoric is great. And you know what? I think he really likes us. There's no question about it. He likes us. But rhetoric does not always work or does not always win the day. We need a United States that's strong, that's united, that's powerful on the world stage. And one of the big pluses of Biden is that he's going to go back. He's going to go back to the Europeans, go back to NATO, go back to our Asian allies, and reestablish the connection between the United States and all the rest of the world. And he'll once again try to establish the mantle of the United States leadership in the world. And without United States leadership in the world, everything that's been built since World War II, the peaceful basis of the world system, it was built starting by Franklin Roosevelt towards the end of World War II, is slowly coming apart because the United States no longer wants to help control that system. And just the opposite, President Trump has been dismantling that system. And for Israel, it's really important that system is there. And it's really important that there's a strong United States to help Israel when time comes, and a United States who can rely upon. So yes, I happen to agree that Trump has wonderful, feels good. He's a good guy in terms of Israel. But when it comes to actual policy, when it comes to actually implementing things on the world stage, that's where his weakness is. And that's why a presidency by Biden will be much better for Israel in the long term.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your perspective. I want to go back to Moti. I'll get to you, Arlene. I want to go back to Moti Kedar for your perspective on the Iranian issue in the election campaign. Then we'll get to Arlene. Go ahead, Moti. You have 2 minutes.
Well, I totally disagree with Mr. Schulman, because as things look from the Middle East, the situation is actually totally opposite. President Trump created fear in the hearts of our enemies. And this is what works for Israel. And this is what brought the agreements which now Israel has with the Emirates and the Bahrainis and now in Sudan. Only because Trump succeeded to strike fear into the hearts of the Iranians. Now the Iranians, their grip over the necks of the Arabs is being loosened a little bit. So Arabs feel much more safer to go and do business with Israel. Just imagine if he loses the presidency and Biden comes in and to re-embolden Iran, all these agreements will evaporate. Nothing will remain from them. Maybe the papers, maybe the signatures, but nothing in the content. And for this, you have to understand the Middle East. The Middle East doesn't work like America. The Middle East works like the Middle East. And for this, you have to be an expert about this region in order to understand the mechanisms and what a powerful and a president, which, the fact that the Trump is not expected gives him a lot of power in the Middle East, because people are afraid of him because he is not expected. And this is actually what enabled having these peace agreements with these Arab countries, because Iran and its allies are afraid of Trump.
Thank you, Moti.
And this is what we should bear in mind.
Let me go on to Arlene Kushner, please.
Okay, first I want to challenge what Mark said about that it's not true that most American Israelis are pro-Trump. It is. It's not 100%. I didn't say it was 100%. It's over 70% of American Israelis vote Republican. It's a much higher number than the number of Jews who are in America who vote Republican. And the difference is based upon the fact that we're here, we see what works here, and we're thrilled with what's happening here. And I know these statistics for a fact. And Moti talked about a good deal of what I wanted to say, but it's also a strengthening of Israel. Without him, it wouldn't have happened at all. The Abraham Accords and now the move towards normalization with Sudan, and Trump says there are others waiting in the wings to do the same. This kind of coalition, this anti-Iranian coalition, which we are part of now, we are no longer isolated in the world. We're no longer the lonely one out. We are part of a coalition. We are needed. We are respected. Our strength and our power in the world have increased. And all of this is due to Trump. And all of this, as Moti said, will evaporate if Biden comes in and reverses it and makes nice to Iran and says that the PLO has the right to everything past the 49 armistice line. It'll destroy everything that's been done. And it's a terror to me to even consider this, because what's being done is so good and so constructive.
David,
One last
may I
question.
intervene?
Go ahead.
David. Okay,
Rabbi
look.
Silver.
Yes, David, I appreciate your bringing people together, but we're not accomplishing what you wanted to do. We're hearing people saying things that are just patently, outrageously absurd. I mean, if you talk about Trump and you don't mention anything negative and all you do is say good things about him, you are completely hopelessly lost. You are not even close to being objective. So let's just explain a few things, because I agree with you, David. Let's be real. Let's be honest. Let's tell Emes and Tzedek, okay? President Trump abandoned the Kurds because he wanted to make money in Turkey. Kurds who were allies of Israel, who fought with us against ISIS, he turned his back on them and allowed them to be slaughtered. That is one of the gravest threats to Israel ever. So now he's saying to anybody, if you fight with us against terrorism and align with Israel, you could be slaughtered, because I have no loyalty to you whatsoever. If I can make a buck, then that comes first. He actually said that the reason why he's friendly to Saudi Arabia is because they make him money. Our entire foreign policy of the United States is based on who makes him money. Saudi Arabia finances madrasas. They're the ones who sponsor terrorism. President Trump will never say a word about that. That is a grave threat to Israel because they make him money. Netanyahu said the greatest threat to Israel are two: the Arabs and climate change. Trump is a climate denier. He denies the greatest threat to Israel and to the earth. And any person who talks about Trump and doesn't mention that he called climate change a hoax is hopelessly out of touch with reality, out of touch with the earth, out of touch with the planet, out of touch with Israel, and out of touch with any source of objectivity. President Trump has denied that he would agree to a peaceful transfer of power if he loses the election. He's an enemy of democracy. He sponsors vigilantes. That's why Abraham Foxman, who is a Holocaust survivor, who is a champion of Jewish ideals, who never takes a position, took a position this time. And he said that President Trump is a friend of bigots. He sponsors anti-Semitism. He is a friend of people who are inimical to the United States. President Trump said that there's good people on both sides of people marching, pro-Nazis. He thinks they're good people. President Trump is a disgrace to every Jewish value. Helping the poor, he mocks it. Helping the immigrant and loving the stranger, he puts them in cages. Telling the truth,
David,
he's a
please.
liar. He has no regard for Jewish values. And I'll say this also. If Israel aligns itself with the devil, then like all the other people who are associated with Trump, who are either in jail or disgraced, Israel will be disgraced. Biden, on the other hand, has always been a strong supporter of Israel. Biden is honest, Biden is clear, Biden is strong, Biden is sure, Biden is someone we can take pride in. I will say this about Trump. I do agree with the transfer of the embassy. I do agree with his recognizing Golan. I do agree with his taking a strong position against using money to finance Hamas and PLO. I agree with all that, but it's far outweighed by all the horrors that this man has committed. And if we align ourselves with him, you might as well just toss any type of security that we have in the world today.
David, may I?
Go right ahead, please, Arlene.
First of all, I thought we were going to talk facts, and the way the rabbi
Those
just
were all
spoke about
facts.
Trump, it's not all facts. And I'm
What
going
did I
to
say that's not a
repeat them.
fact? What did I
What's
say that's
not a
not a fact? What?
I know this because I researched it when it
Tell me
first
what I
came out.
tell
Just a
tell me what I
second, let me say.
no, tell me what I said that's not a fact.
This business about putting the children in cages, it was Obama that put them in cages.
No, he did it. Don't lie. He did it.
I'm not lying. Obama
It was
did it, he inherited it, and he reduced the number of children in the cages.
It was his policy. If you
Wait a second.
criticize, hold on,
ahead.
David. Hold on, David. You can't have people come in and lie. Now, every time you say something about Trump, they're going to say, no, it was Obama. Every time it was Obama. It's a fact. It's a fact, David, and you know it, that he put people in cages. I'm not talking about what Obama did. I'm not a fan of Obama necessarily, but Trump put people in cages. And if somebody says he didn't, they're lying. And you shouldn't even allow them to speak on your show.
The policy
David,
of was 2014.
He's lying.
Was 2014. That's when it began. Very important to know that. And I'm off camera and everything like that. I look forward to sending you that because I was asked.
David, we're not talking about Obama. I didn't say he didn't do it. Okay, Obama was no angel. I'm not talking about Obama. I'm talking about Trump. He put kids in cages. And if somebody says he didn't, they're a liar. And you, David, should not allow them to perpetrate lies on a program that you think is dedicated to truth, because his whole policy was based on putting kids in cages. We know that. And if she says he didn't, she's lying. Yes.
All right, first of all, stop. First of all, I was told we're going to be talking about how the candidates affect Israel. And I didn't come prepared with any other facts, but this is what I was instructed to do. I do not appreciate being called a liar. You say you want dialogue. You don't just offer differences of opinion. You jump at me in the nastiest terms. You call me a liar again, I'm stepping out of this.
Because you are lying.
I am not lying.
If you say Trump did not put kids in cages, you're lying.
He reduced the number and he's trying to reunify them. I researched it and I know it.
He's doing
Do
nothing.
Not call me a liar. The other thing, David, this is not the way it was supposed to be.
That's correct.
The other thing, when you talk about how he praises Nazis and this is a lie against him. I have seen the documentation on this as well, in terms of that he is condemned racists on the right, and it's a calumny against him. And you're going to call me a liar for saying this because you see it another way. And I don't see where we're going. I thought we were supposed to talk about Israel.
I'd like to get back to the purpose of the discussion, which is deal with the issues at hand, okay? The issues at hand, for example, the issue of renewing the PLO status. One of the things that Trump did in his position was that to deny the PLO status so long as they would continue their pay-to-slay policy and make it conditional on that, and they did that. Biden, on the other hand, and tell me if I'm wrong, that in May he said he wants to renew the PLO status in Washington without any conditions. And in terms of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, the position of the Trump administration to pull back American funds so long as UNRWA runs schools based on a curriculum encouraging violence, encouraging genocide. That's something he's done. And now I asked in preparation for not only this program, for my work, I've asked the people in the Democratic Party and in Biden's office, et cetera, what conditions would you place on funding for UNRWA? And the answer is this is not something that we want to deal with. This is a very, very big difference. Okay, Moti, what's your perspective on Trump's position on the PLO and Biden's position on the PLO?
Well, since the Palestinian Authority is not a state in the full meaning of this word, I have absolutely no idea why, to begin with, this entity had an embassy in the United States of America. What, is this a state or not? If it's not a state, why should it have an embassy recognized as an embassy? Okay, so if he closed it, this is the only thing which he could do with this. It's not a state. If you want to recognize it's a state, so say that you recognize it, but they didn't. You cannot, hold the stick on both sides. So this is one thing. Second thing, the Palestinian Authority is going to collapse, and everybody who knows exactly what goes on there knows that everybody there is waiting, in the government, is waiting for the getting away of Mahmoud Abbas in a way or another. And there are at least 4 gangs which are accumulating money and weapons and ammunition and people in order to start street fights as it happens in Syria or in Iraq. Because this is the Middle East. It's not, it's not New York here in this area. So whoever wants to perpetuate this failing Palestinian Authority actually calls for another Syria, to establish another Syria. What happens here, that the only future which I think can be implemented is not even the deal of the century, but the Emirate solution, which I already published it. But the deal of the century of Trump is the closest thing to what I think should be the solution, because this is based on the sociology of the Arab world and on the history and on the reality here on the ground. And to say the truth, Trump came out with this deal of the century, which is the nearest to the possibility to be really implemented on the ground.
Okay.
David, I just want to share with you, I appreciate your telling the truth about these issues, and I think it's very constructive, but I would disagree with Morty when he said that in the Middle East, nobody really cares about anybody else because it's not their tribe. That is true until Israel arrived. Israel is the only country that actually cared about the refugees from Syria. Israel is the only country that actually treats PLO people and Palestinians when they're injured. Israel is the only country that gives a darn about what's going on in Africa. What Morty said is correct, but Israel is a shining bright light in a world of darkness. And we should stress Israel's benefits that they do to the Middle East. And if the Arab countries and the Arab leaders ever wanted to bring about an Arab Spring and wanted to make the Middle East better, instead of trying to destroy Israel, they would imitate Israel, borrow its democracy, borrow its respect for human rights and for women's rights, and allow religious freedom and burst open the door and let Israel be flowering in the Middle East. That is exactly what we need. And Israel is a bright, shining light, and it should stay that way. That's why we need a president who shares these democratic ideals and freedoms, and who believes in Jewish values and Jewish ideals.
So you may be right by saying
so Moti, go ahead, and then we're going to go on to Mark. Go ahead, Moti.
No, you might be right by claiming that Israel is a light for the Middle East. Yes, but talking about democracy here in the Middle East is, please don't start with this, because these societies do not know even how to spell the word democracy, because human rights, political freedoms, women's rights, LGBT rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from religion, all these things are strange ideas in the Middle East, so don't even try to push it into this.
That's exactly what I said. That's exactly what I said, that it doesn't exist anywhere except for Israel. Let me also share that as a Democrat, I congratulate President Trump on moving the embassy to Jerusalem. I think that was a great thing, and I'm glad he had the courage to do it. I just wish when he did it, he didn't have 2 Christian ministers speaking, both of whom say that God doesn't listen to the prayers of the Jews. That's an insult to the Jewish people on that auspicious occasion. But I do agree that he has done some things right. And if we want to be honest and objective, like David suggests, let us admit when somebody on the other side does something good, and let us admit when somebody on our own side, and I agree with what's been said, the Democratic Party has not been strong enough in support of Israel and has allowed things on the left to have too much influence. We need to be strong. And somebody needs to tell Bernie Sanders and the squad this: if you care about human rights, like you say, then you should be the strongest supporter of Israel ever. Stop trashing the only place in the Middle East where human rights are respected. And I will say that as a progressive to the Democratic Party, and I'm waiting for the Republicans and the conservatives to say the same thing about their party, about Trump. When that happens, then the Jewish people will place Israel above politics and above partisanship, and then Israel will be secure when it's not used as a political football.
Okay. Mark Schulman, did you want to add something there?
Two things. First of all, it is not in Israel's interest for the Palestinian Authority to fall apart and collapse. If the Palestinian Authority falls apart and collapses, we have to start providing all of the various services that they do to the population. Maybe not that well, but they do provide those services, and we will be forced once again to provide those services. And that's very problematic for Israel. Number one, the Palestinian Authority has worked hard, relatively speaking, in the last 5, 6, 7 years to fight terrorism. And they worked together until 6 months ago or 9 months ago. They worked together with our security services to do that. Now, I'm not saying they're wonderful, don't get me wrong. And they've made every mistake in the book. And when the Trump peace plan came on the table, I told some of them, engage him. Don't walk away from him. The stupidest thing they did was walking away as opposed to engaging Trump. But they didn't. And the fact of the matter is that they need to climb down from their tree. Now, the other thing I want to mention, though, which is partly relates to us and partly relates to Jews in America together, one of the most problematic approaches that President Trump has had from before he was elected, and certainly since he's been elected, is this idea of America first. America first and Americans first. Often the Jews are outside that circle. I know American Jews think, some of them think they're inside that circle, but all too often they're outside the circle. And when we talk about anti-Semitism in the United States, it has reappeared on the right, primarily because this view of the other. And while Jews don't like to think they're the other, throughout history we've always been the other. And in a country that doesn't accept the other, we once again become the other. And that's when anti-Semitism on the right comes. I'm not saying there's an anti-Semitism on the left. There has been problems in the African-American community in Israel going back to the 60s. But the anti-Semitism on the right that's reemerged in these last few years, including the Pittsburgh shooting and other events, is a very bad sign for the future. And America first also reflects on us too, in terms of Israel. If America first, that means whatever decisions are made, only as they affected the United States, America first, not how they affect us. And lastly, a small thing that was brought up was the issue of Turkey, by the way. Turkey was one of our biggest problems right now in terms of Israel. Strategically, Turkey is a big problem. And the Trump administration, for reasons that I think the rabbi is correct, that has to do with Trump's financial ties in Turkey, has not been willing to engage the Turks. As a matter of fact, there was an article today about the fact that he tried to stop any sort of investigation into Turkish money in the United States. And I think that's a problem for Israel as well. And I think Biden will much better engage the Turks, which is important. And by the way, I do not agree that all these other agreements that we've had with the Arab states in the Gulf will fall apart. I mean, just the opposite, frankly. The reason these agreements have taken place come to the fact that they're afraid America's leaving the region. Now, that may have started with Obama to some extent, don't get me wrong. I think Biden is stronger than Obama is when it comes to projecting American power. But the fact, and by the way, Biden tried very hard to convince Obama to intervene in Syria to save lives. And Obama refused to do it, but Biden very much wanted to do so. So the reality is that the Gulf states have engaged us because they fear America is leaving the region. And if America leaves the region, who's the second most powerful party in this region is us. And Trump and Obama have taken the same position of America is receding. And I think that's been very dangerous for us. And whether Biden wins or doesn't win, I don't think it will have any effect on our relations with the Gulf states. If anything, they'll just be strengthened.
Let me jump in here with some very important facts. The notion that the PLO/Palestinian authorities have been fighting terror can be refuted rather easily. Number one, in 2015, the PA on their law books established an unprecedented law. Anyone who murders a Jew gets an award, not only for himself, but for his whole family. That's formal. Never in history has there been an entity like that. That's number one. Number two, in the past year, there were 600 terror attempts. And yes, 5 succeeded, but the others didn't succeed only because we've got good intelligence. Now, in terms of the deterioration, the absolute deterioration of the PLO and the PA and the support they They used to get completely from the U.S., and now under Trump, it's somewhat conditional. They've established the first school system, and full disclosure, I run an agency, the Israel Resource News Agency, with the Center for Near East Policy Research, which has been named for my family now, Bedein Center for Near East Policy Research. We've translated every single school book that has come out in the last 20 years, and we did it with Arafat's permission, by the way, right? Because they teachers in social work go to the top to get to the approval, even if you have to, in a sense, lower yourself. 364 school books sit in my office. We just got another 70. Find one that talks about peace and reconciliation. On Sunday, we're making a presentation for some of the powers that be in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who've never seen the books. And we show incentivizing murder in the books for children. Children who get up every morning in the Palestinian Authority schools and sing songs about exterminating the Jews. Where in history has that ever happened? And how can we stop that? And who would be best for stopping that? Biden or Trump? That's one of the questions I want to ask the people here right now, based on what you've seen in terms of their record. Understand that this is not a popular thing to raise, because I'm going to give you a news item for those of you in the media following this program. 24 hours ago, the United Arab Emirates, which signed a peace agreement with Israel, was declared by UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, to be the chairman of the advisory council of all the 67 donor nations to UNRWA. They will now have great power. Now, the United Arab Emirates has quadrupled its funds to UNRWA in the last several years, last 2 years, from 12 million to 51 million, unconditional. So the question I want to ask the panel, anyone who wants to respond to this, how can Israel or the U.S. deal with that, and who would be best to deal with restraining and constraining the United Arab Emirates? Who wants to jump in?
Well, it depends on how the Israeli government sees its best interest. If the Israeli government, as it is so far, sees the existence of UNRWA and the continuation of UNRWA, and I would aim the perpetuation of UNRWA as Israeli interest, so the Israeli government will beg money for UNRWA from wherever they can beg money. But if the Israeli government gets the seichel in their head and start to understand that UNRWA is part of the problem, is not part of the solution, and start to defund UNRWA in order to solve the problem of the refugees rather than keeping it alive. So the Israeli government will understand that for its best interest is to tell these countries which give money to UNRWA maybe to consider reducing their contributions to
On October 12th, Gilad Ardan, the UN ambassador, Israel's UN ambassador, declared it is now Israeli policy to fight the education system of UNRWA.
The education system is indivisible part of UNRWA.
Absolutely.
Indivisible part.
Either you have.
Go ahead.
May I respond? And then I have to get to a board meeting. But first of all, I want to congratulate you, David, on raising this issue, on getting the facts and spreading the word. What UNRWA is doing is disgraceful. A United Nations organization is promoting the murder of Jews. And the United States also is funding the murder of Jews indirectly through money to the Palestinian Authority. I congratulate you. I will tell you honestly, as a Democrat, I don't believe that Biden is as likely as Trump to speak out on this issue. Sadly, I think he's influenced by others, and he will not, I don't believe, be as likely to take a strong stand. But if he does, he will be believed. If Trump takes a position on it, he's a laughingstock. He doesn't respect human rights. No one will believe a word that he says, so it wouldn't matter. I also want to tell you, do you know where the slogan America First was first used? Absolutely. David, you're a historian, you probably know it. It was used in the United States during World War II when Lindbergh and anti-Semites wanted to keep America out of World War II so that Hitler could go ahead and slaughter the Jews. It's an anti-Semitic, pro-Nazi, pro-fascist slogan that President Trump has used. He also called the intelligence community Nazis. And this is something that is disgraceful.
Can you back that up?
Absolutely, it's in print. I've seen it. I've read it.
A lot of things in print. I'm looking forward to doing more.
I've heard it.
Listen, hold it.
I heard it. Anyway, I want to thank all of you for allowing me to join. I'm sorry if I monopolized. I think we should tell the truth. And David, I appreciate so much your efforts to bring out the truth on these issues. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate.
Okay, we'll flash our websites now. IsraelBehindTheNews.com and UNRWA-monitor.com. Very important to get the facts. I'm looking forward to doing more Zoom conversations like this and more programs to get the word out, because these are materials not being discussed in the public domain, and my expression, let my people know, has to be much deeper and more solidly appreciated. The fact that there's not enough solid background. Yes, many things are in print, but I don't know if everything in print can be substantiated. But thank you very much for being here tonight. We had the 500 people limit. I'm sorry not everybody could get on this program, but this will be shown on our website tomorrow. And this is the first of a number of dialogues that we hope to take place. And after the election, we're going to come back for another discussion. Thank you.
Toda rabah. Remember, kulanu yachad en lanu pachad. Let's stick together.
Thank you to our panelists, Moti Kedar, Mark Schulman, Arlene Kushner, Rabbi Sober. It's a pleasure to speak with all of you, and may you all have a wonderful Shabbat. Parshat Lech
Shabbat
Lecha. And I wonder what that's talking about. Shalom.
Shalom.